Hello, and welcome to the Yellow Brick Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Helms, and I am excited to introduce you to Dr. Holly Milligan, a very specialized and experienced physical therapist in our Wichita community. She is actually the #1 practitioner of Counterstrain in the entire state of Kansas. There's only 4 other physical therapists who practice Counterstrain, and she is the leading one. She talks to us in this episode about exactly what Counterstrain is and why it's so important and innovative in not only the medical field, but also in the field of therapy and psychology. I can't wait for you guys to learn about this. She's blown my mind in so many different ways, telling me more about Counterstrain. So without much further ado, let's get into the show. All right, so we're going to jump into our first 4. And my first question for you is, what did you want to be as a kid growing up before you transitioned into now being a physical therapist and having your doctorate in physical therapy?
Okay. When I was younger, I wanted to be a vet. We grew up on a farm, so, being around animals, the wildlife. As far as transitioning to a therapist, I'm not for sure if that, just the taking care of or helping people was part of that or not.
Yeah, just wanting to, it sounds like, be a helper.
Yes.
I feel like many of the people I talked to in some capacity were just like, I don't know what I wanted to do, but I wanted to help.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And do you have a lot of animals now?
No, we do not.
Okay.
Nope.
I was just wondering. I was like, I didn't know if that translated into, because some people, they just start collecting animals as they
switch them out for kids.
Hey, there you go.
So, yes.
Animals for humans. Totally makes sense. And tell me about one of what I call your worst or most growing moments as a physical therapist, whether it was as a student or practicing. What was something you learned from?
I think the worst one was as a student. It was a pretty earlier on, and my job was walking a client downstairs, and it happened to be a rather larger client, and just not knowing, I guess, what their capability was. Mm-hmm. And so, luckily we did not tumble down the stairs. We were able to sit down safely, but just knowing kind of how to read people, and what the signs are for when they're having trouble and how to help them. I think if I could have had that a little bit better at the time, we wouldn't have, had to sit down, but just, it could have been a lot worse than it was, but it was definitely I need to really be paying attention
to these things. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious because obviously if people verbally tell you like, hey, I can't do this, that's pretty direct, but what were some of the things you had to learn about? Was it like people's body language or their breathing? What was it that you learned?
Both. Body language, breathing, just, kind of how they're breathing, even if you can't see it, just like shortness of breath versus the, nice calm breath. Eye movements, if they kind of start looking around everywhere. And then just, getting in front of it too. Before we start the activity, how do you feel? Yeah. And I think that's a big thing of what I've learned is sometimes they have a good reading and, it's very helpful, and sometimes they don't know either. So then picking up on those body cues to kind of transition.
When they can't even tell you.
They can't tell us, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. And tell me about a moment that you feel proud of or one of your better moments, doing physical therapy.
It's when I was out in Charlotte working with a kiddo. It was definitely a different setting for me, as far as I went into homes. And so going into this family's home, it took me a long time just to get them comfortable with who I was and to trust me as far as services. And then it was closer to when I was moving. I was working with a speech therapist, and she brought in a language switch button. So, the kid could hit it, and then it talked. Mm. And so they were practicing that when I got there, and the speech therapist goes, oh, this is Miss Holly. Who is she to you? Is she your friend? Is she your family? Or is she your therapist? And the kid kept hitting friend. And they're like, oh, no, that's not it. She's your therapist. And the kid kept hitting friend. Aww. And so I think just where we started with that family and then transition to that was fun to see. So.
Yeah, and people can't see this, but you're tearing up
well,
as you're telling this story,
yeah,
and
it's exciting.
Yeah,
so
yeah, I know. It sounds
you go
like
through those such big moments working with kids, so it's fun.
Yeah, well, and I mean, as a therapist in a different way, I mean, if you've worked with somebody for so long and it takes so long to make breakthroughs, it is emotional, right? Like you feel it, and it's personal, the work that we do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And getting on a little lighter note, tell me about your spirit animal.
Well, I just took the quiz because I didn't know we were supposed to have spirit animals.
I know. I pop quizzed her. Well, I popped this on her earlier, so
yes.
It's kind of my fault.
My spirit animal is a tiger, and so just kind of working with the strength and raw emotion, kind of being determined and independent, which pretty much sums me up. So I think it's a good one.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've only known you for the last month or so, but I could definitely see those character traits and what you do and all that good stuff. No, that's awesome. I'm trying to, I feel like this makes me a bad podcast host, but I feel like someone else has said tiger, and I can't remember who it was. No. Anyway, I've always been fascinated by people's spirit animals and what that can kind of tell about how they connect that to their different personality traits.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think, first things first, when I met you, you had told me about this thing that I had never heard about before in the physical therapy realm, or honestly any realm, called Counterstrain. And that you are one, and you can correct me if any of this is wrong, but that you're 1 in 4 people in Kansas that has any training in this. And in fact, you're the leading person, or you have the most training outside of all those 4 people in Kansas. And that this is just a technique that has been revolutionary in your field. And so I'd love for you to just kind of talk more about what exactly that is, how that's different from, traditional physical therapy when people think about it. And yeah, just tell me more about Counterstrain.
Yes, and it's fascial counterstrain.
Thank you.
Yes. And so it's looking at more of how the whole body moves. So research has come out now that fascia is actually contractile. And so when I was in PT school, I graduated in 2007. This research came out in 2006. So it's pretty still unknown, even at, that time. So we learned as fascia as just an inert kind of a structural, it held things in place.
Okay.
And so since it can contract, they're starting to look at, is the fascia contracting, and that's why the muscle's getting tight. It's a protective, kind of a protective mecknism that, let me go back and say, it covers everything in your body.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a spider web in your whole body. And so, it's from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. So people that come in with like a shoulder injury, it might be the shoulder, but it could be something pulling from anywhere else in your body.
Right.
And so, we've never looked at the fascia as far as causing pain like that because we didn't know it could contract. We've always thought of muscle or, some nerve. But what we're finding a lot of is that muscle's tight because it's protecting something underneath. And so traditional PT looks a lot at, we're going to relax that muscle to take the pain away.
Yes.
Well, if that muscle's protecting like the fascia around a nerve, the fascia around an artery, the vein, you can try to relax and stretch that muscle all you want, but your body's going to hijack it to protect the underlying cause.
Okay. That kind of reminds me of a story I heard actually yesterday. I was talking to a colleague and becoming friend of mine that had talked about how she'd had back issues all of her life, and they found out later on that she had scoliosis in different areas, and I couldn't tell you the extent of what all they were, but there were these back problems, and so she would go get a massage, and she'd think, oh, deep tissue, and that would be great. But what happened was because it was like it was starting to like unravel basically all the stuff that like she didn't know she had scoliosis or any other issues, and so she'd get these massages and be in pain for 2 weeks afterwards. And so she stopped doing massages because she was like, whatever it did, it unraveled the tissue and the muscle kind of holding together like the issues, like kind of compensating for what was going on with her bone structure. And maybe that's a little bit different, but I'm starting to kind of connect the dots where, you might think, people don't really realize that the different structures are all connected, or even how they're connected, right? Like we think it's the muscle or the bone, but it's not always that simple. It's very complex, and even, if they're undoing things with the muscle that the fascia is trying to, like, hold in place. I could be saying this wrong, but you know what I'm saying? Like, that could be actually creating more issues where we're trying to heal.
Yes.
And so, and I know you've mentioned that before too, where it's different than massage therapy.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Brian Tuckey is kind of the one that's come up with the fascial counterstrain, and he has mapped out a lot of the body, and there's very specific points and a very specific glide to turn off, what structure you want to turn off. And so it's not just hunting through the body, like, oh, this hurts, like what could that be? I mean, he's mapped it out to where this is this. And so it's not like the subjective, it's more of an objective that we know what we're treating, and the way it, if you look at the body, if you think of your esophagus, nobody would treat your esophagus in physical therapy. Most people wouldn't.
Yeah, I was like, I don't even, like, the funny part is I know so little about I'm like, where is that? Is that like, that's in here, right?
Yes. So, I mean, it goes all the way down to, like, your thoracic level, like T7. So, pretty much kind of bottom of where your rib cage is. And so that's a long area, but it also passes through, like, the tissue around that surrounds the heart. That, it pierces through your diaphragm. So if you think of that esophagus is tight, if it can actually contract, and once it contracts, I mean, it's stiff. You're not going to stretch out of it with the fascial contraction. Once that's tight, and you go to swallow and eat and, stand up straight, it can pull on the heart. It can pull on the diaphragm. And, the diaphragm's attached also to around the rib cage.
Right.
And the backside of the rib cage. So that could cause back pain. And they're trying to treat the muscles of the back, and it has nothing to do with that.
That's fascinating. So, like, people, like, when they have their shoulders pulled forward, could that be something where the esophagus is tightened?
Absolutely. It could be esophagus, but then if you think of, like, the fascia around vagus nerve, that vagus nerve goes all the way from your head, and there's innervations, branches all the way down to your colon. And so it's a long sucker, so it's going to pull you, into that flexion state. There's also artery nerves and veins that run around each vertebrae, underneath each vertebrae. So if it's that can pull you into this. And so that's the nice thing about what, Brian Tuckey has done, is that he's mapped it out so we're not guessing. Like, we can tell what we need to turn off first. To tell, is it the esophagus? Is it the nerve? Is it the artery? Is it the vein?
So, because he's mapped it out to where he's, how did he even, like, stumble upon this? Like, what was his story behind, like, how he even started this?
He has quite a bit of manual therapy training. He was one of 4 PTs certified under Dr. Jones, who was the originator of strain counterstrain. And what Dr. Jones found out is, it's more positional. So, if you just go into position of ease and hold it there for a while and then, passively come back out, the pain's going to go away. And so what he was doing, and what, Brian has expanded on, is instead of trying to stretch through things, which research shows if you try to stretch fascia, it actually makes it more tight. So a lot of stretching and stuff you're doing, opposite of what you want to do. Yes. But yeah, when you shorten it, it's kind of an instantaneous release of the pain reflex arc. So Brian had training in that, and then he went to a visceral class. and, learned all the visceral techniques, came back to clinic and was doing one and, just knew pushing it, the body was just saying no. You try to push on something, the body doesn't want to go. So, in his mind, he goes, well, counterstrain, you go into ease. So, he took whatever visceral he was which is an organ, working on and just went into ease, and it was just an instantaneous relaxation of everything.
When you say into ease, does that mean like going with where it's resisting, or like what does that mean exactly?
Yep. So if you think your bicep,
okay,
people understand muscle quite a bit better. If you're stretching it and your body's like, oh, that hurts, instead of trying to stretch through it, we're actually going to bring it way into relaxation and hold it there.
Okay. I wish we had like a video for this.
Yes.
We're like extending our arm and then we're bending it towards ourselves extremely, and so it's okay. Is that the counterstrain? Is that why it's called? Okay. Totally.
So you're going against. Yep. You're going into ease, the way the body wants to go. And so kind of how you were talking earlier about, the forward shoulders, and, I was told, stand up straight, get your shoulders back, stand up straight, stand up straight. But if you have something that's the fascia that's just pulling you forward, it's just, your body's just exhausting trying to hold it straight.
Yeah.
So, it's not necessarily a posture thing. There's probably something in the front that's just tight and won't relax.
That is so interesting. So, okay, for the therapy world, here's how my brain works, at least. That kind of makes me think of how people will resist their emotions. And really, the way of getting through their emotions is through it, like to go deeper into it and process it. And, and again, obviously, people have different theoretical orientations, but I do believe that there's so many people that try to, it's like, oh, I'm feeling angry, let me pretend I'm happy. And that doesn't work over time, right? Like in the moment, they're like, okay, great. Just kind of like, pushing your shoulders back might work in the moment. And you might be like successful at willpowering your way through that moment. But over time, it's not healing the root of what's going on.
It's not
so you've got to, so you've got to address the root, which is so crazy because my brain never connected the dots with how that works in the body at all. Like that was thank you.
Yes.
My brain just exploded a little. Cool, that's great, because I'm definitely a person that throughout my life has struggled with my posture, so totally selfish questions here too, but I know a lot of people that do, or they have like that forward, technology shoulder going on.
Yes.
So it's definitely a common issue, and that's really interesting. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about this being correlated, because you talked about the vagus nerve, which some of our audience probably knows what that is, but for other people, that's like the pathway between our brain stem and our gut, right? That long, how our gut is, communicating with our brain. And you can correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, but that's kind of the way I kind of basically lay it out for people. So tell me more about how you guys work with the vagus nerve, or if there's any ways that you work with people's nervous system. Because we're realizing more and more that we've got to treat the nervous system if we're going to work with trauma.
Right.
And so, tell me more about vagus nervous system work you guys do, basically. Very big question out there.
Yep. So we'll backtrack a little bit. And Brian has, kind of developed the nervous system as there is the autonomic nervous system. So you're going to have your sympathetics and your parasympathetics. And then the somatic nervous system, which is more, I can flex my fingers. So the nerves that control movement. And so if you're looking at the nervous system, the sympathetics are going to be your fight or flight. So if they're on, it's just, that heart rate's going, you're ready to go. And the parasympathetics are more your rest and digest, which the vagus is part of the parasympathetics. And so as far as, like I said, he's mapped out. There's techniques for the sympathetics. Part of the sympathetics are going to be your preganglionics, your postganglionics. So if you think of like a power cord, the big one that pulls or that plugs into the wall, if you think of the wall circuit as your spinal cord, and then the outlet, the multiple plugins as your preganglionics, and then you can plug like 5 additional in, and that's going to be your postganglionics.
Okay.
So it's like your spinal cord controls the sympathetics, which controls the postsympathetics.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm tracking so far.
And he's mapped out how to treat all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can treat the sympathetics, also innervate the arteries and the veins.
Mm-hmm.
So if your sympathetics are high, it's going to control the contraction of your arteries and veins. So it'll control blood flow.
Yes.
So working with just calming those down, you're going to level kind of the tension of the arteries and veins, and then overall, how quickly you escalate to being in that fight or flight state.
Okay. So could I give you an example and
Sure.
you kind of help me through like what that would look like? So I even had a client today that was talking about how she's having a really hard time regulating her nervous system because
Mm-hmm.
she's having a lot of stress in her life. And even when she goes home and there's no stress there, she can't really turn it off.
Mm-hmm.
Like she still feels like she's in flight mode.
Yep.
And really struggling to sleep. And, even the other night kind of cried herself to sleep. And I was like, well, that's actually a good thing. And even though, like, sucks to cry yourself to sleep, like, I think, my understanding is when we cry, we're releasing the chemicals that kind of will help us regulate our nervous
Mm-hmm.
system. So that was maybe the only way that she felt, her body felt like she could do it in that moment. But how might you work with somebody who's really struggling to, like, get out of that anxiety, flight mode, that sort of thing? What might you like? And obviously, I know you got to look at their body and what's going on, probably. But what's a general? What's a general case you might see?
Yep. And so we find, the way we kind of find what to treat first is there's a very specific scan that tells you where to treat in the body, and then you find where that if I touch you and
Mm-hmm.
it hurts, like it makes you want to jump off the table. That's what we call a tender point.
Mm.
And so those tender points are associated with very specific structures of the body. So as far as the sympathetics, if we go in and turn those off, it's going to level out kind of that regulation between sympathetics and parasympathetics.
Mm-hmm.
So all the tender points that like we find in your body, everything is on.
Mm.
Okay, so if we turn it down, it's going to naturally bring your parasympathetics up.
Okay.
And so that will level out then the feelings.
Yes, and it'll help kind of bring your
Mm-hmm.
body into a regulated state. Now, does that last, or do people need to kind of, like, do they have to see you weekly to get into a good space, or, like, how does that look over time?
Depends on the person.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on how much they have going on. Typically, we'll see people, 4, 5, 6 times once a week.
Mm-hmm.
With this, it takes the body, even after one session, 24, 48 hours to fully adjust.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes even longer after that. But after you go through it, it's instead of just kind of relaxing everything, you're actually resetting the whole reflex arc. So how the brain perceives that structure, how that structure is firing to the spinal cord to make it contract, all that stuff. And so once you turn that off,
Mm-hmm.
it should last.
Okay.
Obviously, diet's going to be a big thing. If you eat stuff, you're inflammatory. If you eat
Mm-hmm.
something that you're sensitive to, you're going to inflame everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of times I'll ask people if they have heartburn, and oh no, they don't have heartburn, and their spouse is, or a friend is over there, they don't have heartburn because they've been on medication for so long.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And so, medication, and it's masking the symptom,
right?
So they don't have it,
right.
air quotes, but
Mm-hmm.
that food is, or whatever they're ingesting is still inflaming the body.
Right. They address the symptom, but not
Yes.
the root cause. So they're
Correct.
still sending themselves into inflammation, and then we're treating the inflammation, not the root issue.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to Western medicine.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's making a lot of sense,
Mm-hmm.
especially for somebody who at least knows one of her major inflammatory foods, which for me is gluten. I can't do gluten because my
Mm-hmm.
body just completely rejects it. And it makes me miserable. So
Right.
So and having that, my own experience of that, like, even if I were to probably address, like, the digestive issues, like, I didn't realize how much that was connected to my mental health until I actually addressed it. Like, I didn't even connect those dots. And then after the fact, I was like, wow, I didn't realize, like, this would actually make my mental health, my energy levels, everything else that was impacted by that better. So
your whole body's connected, and that's what people forget.
Yeah, and I imagine, too, that, you know, our bodies store so much, and we can work through things in therapy, but if we're not addressing what's going on with our body, it's still going to communicate to our brain that something's going on. For instance, with my client today, it wasn't like she was, you know, stressing about something in particular or thinking stressful thoughts, so you can't, like, CBT her anxiety away. I think she needed something to happen with her nervous system to really just feel like she could just be at peace. And so that's where your role is so crucial in helping me in the work that I do. Not that I just do CBT, but that's a good, clear example for some other therapists out there. So,
and I know the way that we kind of look at it as far as, you know, from the body side of things, it's a lot of the times, you know, you're working through, like, what, prefrontal cortex, and we're working through, you know, the sympathetics through the body, and then we're kind of meeting in the middle at the limbic system.
Yes, that's where I feel like, because we can go a little bit into the limbic system, but even in my own work, I'm like, it's only so limited, right? It's only so limited, and I'll be the first to admit that, and, you know, talk to my clients about, let's try some other things in addition to therapy, because even in my own mental health journey, therapy wasn't enough for me. Yeah, I don't know about everybody else. Maybe they're doing great, but for me and many of my clients,
we have jobs.
Well, and the other part is I've been so influenced by the pioneers in our field right now, and people willing to fund research like this that goes against, you know, our psychopharmacological interventions. So, like, the medicines people are taking for their psychiatric issues, those are the ones that get funded, or the farm the farm research, so to speak. But, you know, stuff like this doesn't get funded because we're not making big pharma any money to fund them. No offense, don't come after me. And I think, and not that it doesn't have its own time and place, but I do feel that this part doesn't get addressed as much. So I'm so grateful that we as a field are expanding.
And there was the Feldenkrais Summit. Feldenkrais is another kind of body awareness technique. If I had all the, you know, the time in the world, I think I would definitely go learn that next. But there's a Feldenkrais Summit that Robert Schleip spoke at, and he's one of the leading researchers behind fascia right now. And he talked about 2 research studies. One was by Hoessel, and I might be pronouncing the names wrong. But
it's hard to pronounce people's names.
Yeah, they need those, like, little clips, like how to pronounce. But it showed, and of course this is going to be in animals, but it showed the emotional stress by forced immobility. And so it was on animals. And, you know, of course the animal people questioned it, and, you know, they pretty much said, well, this is what we do to our kids in school. You know, they have to sit in this desk, this defined space, for this amount of time, so they couldn't really say anything about it and allow the study to go. But what they found was that that stress from being forced to be immobile, so that not natural movement, increased the sensitivity to pressure pain, and then like your pain response to repetitive stimulus. And so, you know, if I touched you with just like a little bit of pressure, you know, you might not feel it, but someone that's been, you know, unable to move, or, you know, they're going to feel that as pain.
Yes.
And then the other one, you know, talking about trauma and stuff, looked at childhood maltreatment, and they found that kids with, you know, that experienced that had the same increased sensitivity to the pressure and the repetitive pain in the back muscles. And then they also separated it to emotional abuse, if they experienced that as a kid, was more sensitive to repetitive pain, or the repetitive stimulation, and then sexual abuse was geared, or kind of enhanced more with pressure sensitivity. So they're really even, I mean, breaking it down to, you know, what causes what, even with what we experienced younger.
Right, like the specific traumas being more correlated with different ways it manifests in our pain and how it manifests in our bodies. That's fascinating. The other thing, I don't remember the study, so I'm just going to say a generalization here, but we do know that with animals, if they So they did this, I think, with dogs, and I think it was either, I forget the pain stimulus, if it was like ice cold water or an electric zap, I can't remember. But anyway, the point of it is they put animals in a bigger area, and then they put them through pain, and then they did it again, but they caged them while they were going through pain. So they put them in, they kind of bound them to not being able to move or do your natural, not to get out of your cage. And that trauma was more severe, or they had more PTSD symptoms and severe trauma after the fact than the animals that were uncaged. So there is something, we're learning more about there being something to, not only experiencing traumatic events, like that alone, can induce trauma, or the way that we'll see the world, ourselves, or other people differently in a negative way. But also, if we feel restrained or like we can't immobilized, that's the word used, immobilized during that event, that also matters. So we're learning a lot more about that too in our field. So,
and what's really interesting about that is, I know we've talked about epigenetics before.
Oh yeah.
Yep. And so, as far as how, like if they had a litter of puppies, how they would, initially respond to that.
Yes.
And then if we can take, how early we would need to introduce like a different stimuli to get them out of that kind of habit or that natural response, I guess.
Right. So do you feel like what you do teaches the body a different way of being in a way? Because I know that sometimes even in therapy, it's like the exposure to having even a healthy relationship with somebody, like that itself is healing, that they get the experience of it, right? Or you putting people in an experience where their body isn't, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm wondering if that gives, I'm wondering if it even just gives their brain the ability to say that's an option.
Right.
Right?
Well, and that's what this does.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just didn't want to assume.
Nope, that's what it does.
Oh, that's awesome.
The problem, if you think of like a muscle contraction, we can actively release it.
Yeah.
With fascia, your body does not have a way to actively release it.
By itself.
Okay. Yep. And so once you do release it, it's just, this is different. And so, once you start taking even just pain, I mean, you look at someone's demeanor before, and then you look at their just facial expressions, and after, they've changed. And so it's more, I mean, there definitely is an emotional response because one, your feelings are part of your nervous system.
Yes.
It's not, they're not separate. So you change how you feel, and your brain changes.
Yes.
And your how you perceive things will change, and so
and that impacts everything, right?
And that impacts everything,
right? And trauma. I mean, I like the definition that Gabor Mate uses, where it's not an issue of exactly what happened to you, or whether you went through a tornado, or someone just making an offhand comment. It's how your perception or your view of the world, yourself, or others changed after that moment, or a rule you created to provide safety once you started to fear something, or try to avoid something in the world or in other people or yourself. So I love that you brought in perception, because that's absolutely accurate. Well, we're going to dive into our final four.
Okay.
If you're ready for that.
Yes.
And of course, I can't remember the first one that I asked. I think it's, what is a book recommendation for somebody inside or outside of the field that you would give to them around these topics?
Oh, that's going to be tough, because really there are no books. This is so new.
Is it?
It is so new. There's a bunch of research articles, but I know that's pretty tough. But as far as a book...
is there a good website that they can check out?
TuckeyPT.com, so TuckeyPT.com is Brian Tuckey's. He's the founder. His business website. And that has a lot of more medical terms, I feel. Counterstrain.com, it's a Counterstrain Academy. It's run in Portland by Tim Hodges. He kind of does a lot with Brian as far as developing the technique. There's a lot more for patient kind of understanding. Yeah. So it's counterstrain.com. Okay. So I would say those are two great websites for information.
And resources. Awesome. And do you have any words that are like a mantra for you or any quotes that you really like? You're like, I don't even know. It's so funny. So many people are like, some people like words and they kind of hold on to mantras in their life. Mine for this year has just been, it actually was influenced by my CrossFit coach, but it was just that I can do hard things.
Oh,
because it helps me get through. And even I had a talk with somebody that works in helping people through sports issues, and she was talking about mantras and your training, and I was like, she just solidified everything that he had shared with me about using those positive reframes, because in my head, usually I'm looking at a workout, and I'm like, I can't do this. I'm like, I don't know about, and I'm freaking out in my head, and I'm like, I can do hard things. This is hard, but I can do it, and it's been helpful not only in my like workout life, but also business wise, because there are just different obstacles and things I'm trying out this year that at first glance I'm like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And then you kind of push through your discomfort and you can do it. So I don't know if anything's been meaningful in that regard.
No, I mean I'm right now. I feel we're kind of in the process of like living about 2 hours away from Wichita here.
Right.
And so it's doing, working in both places, trying to juggle everything. So, I mean, mine's pretty much like just keep moving.
Just keep going.
Just keep
Probably
going.
also your own version of I can do hard things.
Yes. Yep.
That's what it sounds like. No, I can only imagine being in between two cities, and not only two cities, but two that are 2 hours away.
Yep.
So,
and I think just taking it one step at a time.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's points that I start thinking like, what about September? What about October? And it's like, let's just get through today.
Yes.
And so, that really takes a lot of the pressure, the worry, the stress. It just makes it all more manageable. So I think just kind of backtracking and let's do today.
Yes. No, that totally makes sense. And my last question for you is, was there anything else that you feel is important to know about you or the topics we talked about today, or a question I didn't ask that you feel would have been important to ask?
I mean, I think we covered quite a bit.
I'm sure there's so much more we could cover, but but at least getting through the basics of Counterstrain. And I learned from you today, so thank you.
Yes. Yes.
I feel like, again, in my brain, I had the traditional way of thinking about stretching and just trying to get through things, pushing against it. So to me, it is fascinating to even think about moving into something. Like, I've never even considered that.
Yeah. It's definitely a completely different way of looking at the body.
Yeah.
So
that's really, and I hope that for any of the people or therapists that are listening to this, that you can understand and relate to, some of the topics we're talking about, but not only that, and understand that we have this amazing resource here in Wichita that we're so grateful for, to try something different, because I know that not only different, but effective. I know that I've had so many clients where they've tried physical therapy or done other interventions and not had success with it. And so hopefully this is a message of hope for people to not give up. Because, sometimes it takes that third or fourth or even 10th thing that you've tried to really help and meet your body where it's at. And I'm just so grateful that we have this resource here. So
yeah, I'm excited to start. So
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jenny.
Hey, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you wanted to get in touch with Dr. Holly Milligan, you can reach her by calling 316-201-6047, or you can find out more information about her and visit the contact page at www.somawichita.com. Until next time.